I've collected more than 180 historical photos that you missed. Write in the comments what photos you liked and why. In 1941, Ouija photographed an injured woman smoking inside a wrecked car while waiting for an ambulance in New York. A man held the cigarette to her lips as another injured passenger sat beside them. These police photographs show a young woman arrested in Paris in 1895, but they do not reveal whether she was ever convicted. The front and profile views were part of the Bertillon system, which used standardized images and body measurements to identify repeat offenders. Clara Brim, a formerly enslaved woman, stands outside her Texas home in 1937, more than 70 years after slavery was abolished. Her photograph preserves the face of someone who survived one of the darkest chapters in American history. On October 24, 1946, a camera strapped to a captured German V-2 rocket took the first photograph of Earth from space. The rocket crashed at high speed, but its film survived inside a steel cassette. On April 13, 1932, 2,000 people watched England's first women's weightlifting contest. The winner, Ivy Russell, weighed only 126 pounds, but lifted an astonishing 369.5 pounds. A Soviet Mi-8 helicopter flies past the giant Buddhas of Bamiyan during the Soviet war in Afghanistan in 1980. Carved into the cliffs over 1,000 years ago, both statues survived centuries of conflict before the Taliban destroyed them in 2001. In 1963, Henry Cooper's brutal left hook knocked Muhammad Ali through the ropes and left him badly shaken. Ali later called it the hardest knockdown of his career and joked that the punch was so powerful his ancestors in Africa felt it. On June 26, 1988, this brand-new Airbus A320 flew just 30 meters above a French airshow with 136 people aboard. The captain trusted its computers and said he had done it 20 times before, but seconds later, the aircraft crashed into the forest. An Ethiopian rebel carries an East German MPY-KMS-72 rifle through Addis Ababa on June 8, 1991. The image was taken days after the EPRDF seized the capital and ended the Derg dictatorship after 17 years of brutal rule. Archaeologists uncover a colossal winged bull at Dur Sharukin, the ancient capital built by Assyrian king Sargon II. The city was abandoned soon after his death in 705 before Christ and remained buried for over 2,000 years. In 1885, 11-year-old Santiago Maquin was photographed at Geronimo's camp after Chiricahua Apache warriors captured him in Arizona. When soldiers rescued him months later, Santiago reportedly cried and wanted to remain with the Apache family that had adopted him. A bomb explodes over Saint-Malo during the fierce battle for the French port in August 1944. German troops had turned the old fortress city into a stronghold, and the fighting left most of its buildings destroyed or badly damaged. Indigenous children were forced to pray in Canadian residential schools designed to erase their languages, cultures, and identities. Run by churches and funded by the government, the system separated thousands from their families and exposed many to hunger, disease, and abuse. On August 8, 1944, this American P-47 Thunderbolt crashed in Normandy, killing its pilot. A French refugee couple buried him beside the wreck and marked his grave with rows of .50 caliber ammunition from the fallen fighter. 3 young newsboys smoke in St. Louis in 1910 when children sold papers for pennies on dangerous city streets. Cigarettes were cheap, age limits were weak or ignored, and smoking was often treated as proof that a boy had become tough and grown up. In 1991, Princess Diana shook hands with an AIDS patient without gloves, directly challenging the false belief that HIV spread through touch. Her simple gesture helped fight the fear and stigma surrounding people with the disease. In 1913, photographer Johannes Pesuka captured manure haulers Gustav, age 65, and Anton, age 68, smoking pipes at Monolohu Farm in Estonia. Their torn clothes and rough footwear reveal the harsh reality of rural labor before modern machinery. In 1946, a young girl sat above the ruins of the Warsaw Ghetto, where German forces had destroyed thousands of buildings after the uprising. Beneath her stretched the remains of a district where hundreds of thousands of Jews had been imprisoned. After Kim Il-sung died in 1994, devastated North Koreans gathered beneath his giant statue in Pyongyang. Public mourning was mandatory, and authorities reportedly monitored citizens for signs that their grief was not sincere. In 1969, Margaret Hamilton stood beside the printed code her MIT team wrote for the Apollo guidance computer. During the moon landing, the software prevented an overload from stopping the mission, helping Apollo 11 land safely. This 1884 photograph shows the enormous portal of the Temple of Bacchus in Baalbek, built by the Romans nearly 18 centuries ago. Despite earthquakes and centuries of destruction, its richly carved doorway and towering columns survived with astonishing detail. On August 7, 1916, Lieutenant Ernest Brooks photographed artillery fire, lighting the night near Thiepval during the Battle of the Somme. The bright arcs reveal shells crossing the battlefield, capturing modern industrial war in a single exposure. In 1967, an American M48 tank commander presses his eye to a periscope, watching the battlefield without exposing his head. Inside the cramped turret, this narrow view could reveal an enemy tank seconds before it fired. On August 9, 1965, Lee Kuan Yew announced that Singapore had separated from Malaysia and become independent. During the televised press conference, he broke down in tears, calling the split a moment of anguish. In 1915, women at London's Woolwich Arsenal assembled the precision fuses that made artillery shells explode at the intended moment. One tiny mistake could leave a shell useless or cause a deadly accident inside the factory. In May 1932, passengers pushed the Michów to Krakow bus through deep mud on a rural Polish road. Before paved highways became common, a simple rainstorm could turn an ordinary bus trip into a rescue operation. A servicewoman of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps poses in full uniform in Pittsburgh in 1942. These women took military jobs away from the front, freeing thousands of men for combat during the Second World War. 21-year-old Yves Saint Laurent leaves Christian Dior's funeral in 1957. Weeks later, he was chosen to lead Dior, becoming the world's youngest head designer at a major fashion house. This family portrait was taken during the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, when masks became part of daily life. Even the family cat appears to wear a tiny mask, turning an ordinary photograph into one of the strangest images of the outbreak. On 7 August 1998, truck bombs exploded minutes apart at the United States embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. The attacks killed 224 people, injured thousands, and brought Al-Qaeda to worldwide attention 3 years before September 11th. At the 1948 London Olympics, Alice Coachman cleared 5 feet 6 and 1/8 inches despite a back injury, becoming the first black woman to win Olympic gold. Segregation had barred her from proper facilities, so she trained barefoot on dirt roads using homemade equipment. In the early 1900s, workers chained thousands of logs into giant rafts on the Columbia River. Tugboats pulled these floating loads to sawmills, moving enormous amounts of timber without trains or trucks. In 1991, an ammunition depot exploded in Addis Ababa during Ethiopia's violent transfer of power. The massive blast reportedly killed between 400 and 500 people, sending burning shells across the capital. On August 8, 1988, Iran and Iraq agreed to a United Nations ceasefire, ending 8 years of war that killed hundreds of thousands. Iran's leader, Ruhollah Khomeini, said accepting the peace was more deadly than drinking poison, but he saw no other choice. During the 1961 inaugural parade, 9 members of John Kennedy's wartime crew appeared aboard a replica of PT-109 to surprise him. The real boat had been split in half by a Japanese destroyer, leaving Kennedy to lead his stranded men to safety. At the Paris World's Fair in 1878, visitors could climb inside the Statue of Liberty's completed head. France displayed it years before the full statue was assembled in New York. On August 6, 1944, Private Margaret Hicks marked another V-1 flying bomb destroyed by her mixed anti-aircraft battery on England's south coast. Nicknamed the Doodlebug, this weapon could strike without warning once its buzzing engine suddenly stopped. On August 7, 1944, P-51C Mustangs of the Tuskegee Airmen took off from Ramatelli, Italy, to protect bombers over Nazi-held Europe. The all-black 332nd Fighter Group became famous for its red-tailed aircraft and disciplined escort tactics. Staff Sergeant Harold Sweet posed with his sisters before joining the United States Army Air Forces in 1942. 2 years later, his bomber was hit over France and broke apart in midair, killing 6 of the 7 crewmen. Edgar Keaton married his hometown sweetheart in December 1943, then was drafted into the Army just days later at age 18. Sent to France as a replacement, he joined his unit on July 23, 1944, was wounded 15 days later, and died the next day. This 1931 aerial view shows Manhattan and Central Park just as the Empire State Building was completed. Look closely above the river near the top of the photograph, and you can spot a tiny Zeppelin flying over New York. Hunter S. Thompson and Bill Murray in 1980, the year Murray played him in Where the Buffalo Roam. Murray studied Thompson so closely that he copied his voice, clothes, and behavior even after filming ended. In 1930, Franklin Delano Roosevelt leaned down to speak with voter Reuben Appel shortly before winning re-election as governor of New York. Just 2 years later, Roosevelt won the presidency and began leading America through the Great Depression. In Lhasa, around 1955, this Tibetan woman sticks out her tongue in a traditional sign of respect and peaceful intent. The custom is often linked to fear of a cruel 9th century king said to have had a black tongue. Aileen Stone represented Hawaii at the 1953 Miss Universe pageant, posing for this promotional portrait in Long Beach, California. Photographed on July 17th, she was one of all 26 contestants captured in a rare Kodachrome color series. Johnny Eck, born with only a partially developed lower body, learned to walk on his hands before his twin brother Robert learned to walk on his feet. The brothers later built a remarkable career together, performing magic shows and claiming they were identical twins. In 1933, homeless New Yorkers built a shantytown in Central Park, where the Great Lawn stands today. Unemployment in the city was nearing 25%, forcing even educated workers and former businessmen to survive in makeshift huts. In 1982, former child star Pepa Flores married dancer Antonio Gades in Cuba, with Fidel Castro serving as a witness. Once celebrated by Franco's regime, she had become a communist and donated her gold trophies to support the Cuban Revolution. Marilyn Monroe hugs a young girl between takes on the set of The Misfits in 1960. The troubled production became the final completed film for both Monroe and Clark Gable. In 1898, Klondike stampeders had to haul 2,000 pounds of supplies up the deadly Chilkoot Pass. Most needed at least 40 trips to move the full load over the frozen trail. On July 22, 1946, Irgun fighters disguised as Arab workers hid milk cans packed with explosives beneath Jerusalem's King David Hotel. The blast destroyed the wing-housing British offices and killed 91 people, making future Israeli Prime Minister Menachem begin one of the era's most controversial figures. On March 30, 1968, anti-war protesters marched through rain-soaked Vancouver demanding an end to the Vietnam War. Teachers joined the demonstration under a huge banner showing how deeply opposition to the conflict had spread across Canadian society. Soviet school children learned to use gas masks as part of civil defense training. Victor Bulla photographed this haunting pioneer drill near Leningrad in 1937 as fears of chemical warfare spread across Europe. Gutzon Borglum built this 1/12 scale model to show his full vision for Mount Rushmore, including more of each president's body. Funding problems and Borglum's death in 1941 left the monument unfinished. A miner's wife stores dishes in her company-owned home in Monongalia County, West Virginia, in 1946. Even her family's housing depended on the coal company that employed her husband. On October 25, 1944, a Japanese kamikaze crashed through the flight deck of USS St. Lo during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The impact ignited bombs and fuel below, triggering massive explosions that sank the carrier and killed 143 Americans. In 1973, patrolman Matthew Sullivan carried seized reels of Deep Throat from New York's World Theater after its owners were charged with promoting obscenity. A judge called the film the lowest point of decadence and ruled it obscene under every legal standard. In 1959, aerospace engineer Judith Love Cohen helped develop the abort guidance system for the Apollo lunar module. 11 years later, that system helped bring the Apollo 13 astronauts safely home after an oxygen tank exploded in space. In the early 1900s, daredevils called human flies climbed skyscrapers without ropes or safety gear to entertain huge crowds. One mistake meant certain death, yet some completed hundreds of dangerous climbs across America. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay backed over this hidden pit so Little Boy could be lifted directly into its bomb bay. Hours later, the uranium bomb destroyed Hiroshima, becoming the first atomic weapon used in war. In August 1867, Union Pacific worker William Thompson survived being scalped and left for dead by Cheyenne warriors. He recovered his severed scalp and gave it to Dr. R.C. Moore, who later donated it to the Omaha Library. Around 800 BC, 2 people suffocated in a storage bin while Hassanlu burned during a brutal attack. Found face-to-face in 1972, they became known as the Hassanlu Lovers, although nobody knows if they were truly kissing. These Austro-Hungarian assault troops carry a German portable flamethrower, one of the most feared weapons of the First World War. One soldier operated the fuel tank and hose, while his partner helped protect him during attacks on trenches and bunkers. When Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, it flattened more than 230 square miles of forest. Logging crews later recovered 850 million board feet of timber, enough to build 85,000 homes. On the Bessarabian front, an Austro-Hungarian patrol crawls beneath enemy barbed wire while carrying rifles and hand grenades. The photograph captures the deadly work of clearing a path during a new Russian offensive, when one hidden wire or exposed movement could bring instant machine gun fire. On Christmas Eve, 1953, a wall of volcanic mud from Mount Ruapehu smashed this railway bridge just minutes before a passenger train arrived. 6 carriages plunged into the flooded river, killing 151 people in New Zealand's deadliest rail disaster. In 1924, a truck broke through a Washington street and exposed tunnels secretly dug by Smithsonian entomologist Harrison Dyer. He built hundreds of meters by hand, added electric lights and tiled rooms, and used German newspapers for insulation, fueling rumors of spies. Before the moon landing, Apollo astronauts practiced every movement in heavy suits beside a full-size lunar module. They rehearsed collecting rocks under strict time limits because every minute on the lunar surface was carefully planned. In 1922, Howard Carter uncovered Tutankhamun's tomb after years of searching, finding its chambers almost untouched for more than 3,000 years. Inside were over 5,000 objects, including the famous solid gold burial mask, royal chariots, weapons, jewelry, and the young pharaoh's coffin. NASA engineers in Mission Control tracked every signal, engine burn, and life support reading during the Apollo missions. Their calculations and split-second decisions helped guide astronauts across nearly 240,000 miles to the moon and safely back to Earth. Around 1900 in Tennessee, Jim Turner, born into a wealthy white family, posed beside his wife Carrie, a black schoolteacher, and their 3 sons. George, William, and Hardin later became doctors, an extraordinary achievement for black men during the era of racial segregation. During the deadly Nome diphtheria outbreak of January 1925, 20 mushers and about 150 dogs rushed life-saving medicine across frozen Alaska. Togo covered the longest and most dangerous stretch, but Balto led the final team into Nome and became the national hero. During the Yellowstone fires of 1988, flames climbed from the forest floor into the treetops through dry branches and smaller trees. Once the crowns ignited, powerful winds carried burning embers ahead, creating new fires faster than crews could contain them. This is San Francisco before and after smoke from the California Camp Fire covered the city in November 2018. The fire burned more than 150,000 acres over 150 miles away, yet its smoke turned the Bay Area sky almost colorless. Born in January 1912, Great Aunt Letha lived for 108 years and witnessed nearly a century of extraordinary change. She was born 3 months before the Titanic sank and often said, "If it changed, then I saw it." In 1927, the Great Mississippi Flood submerged entire streets in Cape Girardeau, leaving boats and cranes beside flooded buildings. It became one of the most destructive river disasters in United States history, affecting more than 700,000 people. This photograph shows the doomed Wrangel Island expedition of 1921, including Ada Blackjack, 4 explorers, and their cat Victoria. 3 men vanished in the Arctic. 1 died from scurvy, but Ada taught herself to hunt and survived alone with the cat until rescue. On June 20, 1940, the British submarine Clyde fired 6 torpedoes at Gneisenau, and 1 ripped open the battleship's bow. This photograph shows the enormous breach exposed during repairs at the Kiel shipyard. In 1978, a reporter investigating Mary Dufour's death uncovered evidence that she was actually Anna Merrill Sizer. Her brother rejected the claim because accepting it meant admitting their family had abandoned her in institutions for the criminally insane for 50 years. Croatian President Franjo Tudjman meets General Ante Gotovina during Operation Storm in August 1995, when Croatian forces retook most Serb-held territory in just 4 days. Gotovina was later convicted of war crimes, but the verdict was overturned on appeal. In 1980, Black Panther co-founder Huey P. Newton posed with armed Palestinian fighters outside a refugee camp in Lebanon. The image captured the Panthers' international alliance with revolutionary movements far beyond the United States. A poor peasant father stands with his 4 barefoot sons in Nizhny Novgorod Gubernia, Russian Empire, in 1902. Their patched clothes reveal the harsh poverty faced by millions of rural Russian families. National Guard troops fired tear gas at Kent State students protesting the Vietnam War and the invasion of Cambodia in 1970. Minutes later, they opened fire for 13 seconds, killing 4 students and wounding 9. This 1943 mugshot shows John Elton Bembry, the career criminal who became Malcolm X's first major intellectual influence in prison. At Norfolk Prison Colony, Bembry took Malcolm under his wing, pushed him to read seriously, and helped begin the transformation that changed American history. A Maori guard speaks with a Japanese prisoner at a New Zealand camp during the Second World War. Thousands of Japanese captives were held at Featherston, where a deadly clash in 1943 left 48 prisoners and 1 guard dead. In 1960, food shortages swept across the Soviet Union, leaving many shops without flour, butter, meat, and white bread. Writer Nikolai Nosov reported that bread stores restricted sales to gray loaves made with peas. Early slingshot dragsters placed the driver behind the rear axle, inches from spinning tires and exposed machinery. This dangerous layout improved traction, but engine explosions could send burning fuel and metal straight toward the driver. On Halloween in 1962, Jackie Kennedy dressed as a ghost by draping a dark sheet over her head. The unusual costume hid one of the world's most recognizable women behind two simple eye holes. Soviet cosmonauts Alexei Leonov and Valery Kubasov trained for an emergency sea landing before the Apollo-Soyuz mission. The photo was taken in 1975, 12 years before the Mir date often attached to it. This photograph shows a crowd outside the First State Bank of Las Vegas in 1905, the year the city was founded. Las Vegas began as a dusty railroad town decades before its casinos, neon lights, and worldwide fame. A London street lies buried under rubble after a German bombing raid in 1940. During the Blitz, London was attacked for 57 nights in a row, destroying homes, killing civilians, and forcing millions to sleep in shelters. Sergeant Geisler calmly gets a haircut despite the thick cast covering his arm and shoulder. This rare military medical photograph shows wounded soldiers returning to ordinary routines during recovery. Nicknamed Dummy, this trench runner carried cigarettes and other supplies through enemy fire for the 11th Engineer Regiment. He was wounded twice, survived both times, and kept returning to the front to raise the soldiers' morale. In 1924, trainer Charlie Becker walked his troop's smallest elephant into a Washington bank to deposit money for Keith's Theater. The elephant carried the satchel to the teller itself, turning an ordinary bank visit into an unforgettable spectacle. In 1961, East German workers built the Berlin Wall to stop citizens escaping to West Berlin. The barrier appeared almost overnight, splitting streets, homes, and families for 28 years. A Japanese torpedo tore the bow off the destroyer Selfridge during the Battle of Vella La Vella on October 6, 1943. Despite 13 men killed and massive damage, the crew kept the ship afloat, and it later returned to combat. British bombers faced searchlights, anti-aircraft fire, and night fighters over Berlin in 1944. The glowing rings were caused by moisture inside the camera, turning each bright explosion into a strange halo. This is not an invasion, but a 1970 load test of Prague's Nusel Bridge using 66 T-55 tanks. Together, the tanks weighed about 2,400 tons, proving the unfinished bridge could withstand extreme pressure before opening to traffic. A Soviet My-24 unleashes rockets on Mujahideen positions during the war in Afghanistan. Nicknamed the Flying Tank, this heavily armored helicopter could carry troops while attacking ground targets with rockets, cannons, and guided missiles. German soldiers turned this donkey into Comrade Field Gray, complete with a spiked helmet, rifle, canteen, and heavy field pack. The staged portrait reveals how regimental mascots brought humor and comfort to troops trapped in the brutal routine of the First World War. In 1933, waiters at a Bavarian restaurant served guests while wearing huge bird, deer, and human masks. The strange carnival scene was photographed in Germany during the same year Adolf Hitler seized power. In 1919, thousands packed Boston's Fenway Park for a huge rally supporting Irish independence from British rule. The crowd demanded American recognition of the new Irish Republic, while Ireland's fight for freedom was still raging. In 1939, New York Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia came face-to-face with a 300-pound halibut at Manhattan's Fulton Fish Market. The enormous fish weighed nearly as much as 2 adult men and towered over the smiling mayor. East German forces began sealing Berlin on August 13, 1961, first with barbed wire and then concrete blocks. Armed guards watched the construction to stop citizens from escaping, turning streets and neighborhoods into a deadly border almost overnight. This giant Kaplan turbine runner is pictured before installation, surrounded by the workers who built it. Its adjustable blades could change angle while spinning, keeping a hydroelectric generator efficient as water levels shifted. German bombs devastated London's Docklands on September 17, 1940, destroying homes, warehouses, and vital port facilities. The raid was part of the Blitz, a campaign designed to cripple Britain through relentless bombing. German paratroopers descend over Crete in May 1941 during Operation Mercury, history's first major airborne invasion. Germany captured the island, but its heavy losses shocked Hitler and ended large-scale German airborne assaults. In December 1941, children, dependents, and office workers in besieged Leningrad received only 125 grams of bread a day. The ration was made with flour substitutes and impurities, yet for starving civilians, this tiny piece could decide who survived another day. On November 24, 1942, German dive bombers attacked Stalingrad's factory district as Soviet forces closed their trap around the German 6th Army. The burning plants remained vital battlefields where workers had repaired tanks dangerously close to the front. This 1912 René Gillet motorcycle shows how early riders traveled before modern suspension, reliable brakes, or protective helmets. René Gillet machines became famous in France for their strong engines and later served the French Army and police. These rare photographs show Andrew Jackson just months before his death in 1845, making him the earliest United States president ever photographed. The former orphan survived wars, duels, and a bullet lodged near his heart, but died at 78 after years of severe illness. In 1942, photographer Max Alpert captured political officer Alexei Yeremenko, rallying Soviet troops during a German attack in Ukraine. Moments after raising his pistol and shouting for his men to follow, Yeremenko was reportedly killed in combat. In May 1943, Indian freedom fighter Subhas Chandra Bose posed with the crew of a Japanese submarine after a secret voyage from Europe. He had crossed the ocean aboard German and Japanese submarines to continue his fight against British rule. During the Bosnian War in 1995, this couple celebrated their wedding as an armed man escorted them through the streets. The rifle reveals how danger had become part of even the happiest moments. In 1983, the cargo ship Kolasin ran aground beside the railway in Lazarevskoye, Sochi. The stranded giant became a local landmark, but looters slowly stripped it apart before the remaining hull was finally cut up for scrap. This is 13-year-old Cher in a Los Angeles police photo from 1959 after she allegedly took her mother's car without permission. Decades later, she became an Oscar-winning actress and one of the world's most famous singers. In 1972, this officer caught minors drinking beer, but chose not to arrest them. Instead, he poured the alcohol onto the ground, turning a crime into a warning they would never forget. The KM Caspian Sea Monster was a secret Soviet ekranoplan that flew just above the water using ground effect. At nearly 100 meters long and powered by 10 jet engines, it was the heaviest aircraft ever built when testing began in 1966. In 1924, Sydney police photographed arrested men in their own clothes instead of forcing standard mugshot poses. This is Sidney Patrick Kelly, known as the Baccarat King, calmly facing the camera at Sydney's Central Police Station. In 1966, the blood-stained bronze casket that carried President Kennedy from Dallas was secretly dropped from a military plane into the Atlantic Ocean. Officials drilled holes into it, sealed it inside a heavy crate, and watched it sink into 9,000 feet of water. The Japanese light cruiser Agano sails off Sasebo, armed with 6 large guns and powerful torpedoes. Designed to lead destroyer fleets, she survived multiple attacks before the American submarine Skate sank her in February 1944. 2 Somali women pose in modern fashion at a Mogadishu bar in 1968, when the capital had a lively cosmopolitan culture. Just 1 year later, a military coup brought Siad Barre to power and transformed Somalia's future. In 1959, Dagmar the Basset Hound celebrated New Year's Eve in Washington, wearing a party hat beside a clock nearing midnight. Her gloomy expression turned a simple holiday portrait into a strangely unforgettable scene. On New Year's Eve in 1938, Adolf Hitler played Kegeln, a German form of bowling, beside Eva Braun. The rare colorized scene reveals the private life Hitler carefully kept hidden from the German public. Ham the chimpanzee is strapped into his flight couch before his mission on January 31, 1961. He survived the violent flight and proved humans could perform tasks in space, helping clear the way for Alan Shepard. In 1984, tens of thousands of miners crowded into Brazil's Serra Pelada mine, digging by hand in one of the largest gold rushes in history. Workers carried heavy sacks up dangerous wooden ladders, hoping each load contained enough gold to change their lives. In August 1945, Soviet T-34 tanks crossed the Greater Khingan Mountains during the invasion of Japanese-occupied Manchuria. Japan considered this rugged route almost impassable, so the armored attack achieved devastating surprise and helped crush its defenses in just days. From 1940 to 1944, most Parisians walked or cycled because fuel was scarce and cars were seized for German use. Thousands of vehicles stood abandoned in storage yards, while the occupied city nearly vanished from the roads. In 1945, American troops crossed the Siegfried Line, where thousands of concrete dragon's teeth were built to trap tanks. Engineers often had to blast paths through these obstacles while soldiers advanced under enemy fire. An immigrant family stands for a photograph in New York around 1900, with 9 children lined up by height beside their parents. Their worn clothes show the harsh reality faced by families who crossed an ocean to begin again in America. The first Formula One World Championship race took place at Silverstone on May 13, 1950. Giuseppe Farina won in an Alfa Romeo, leading a dominant sweep of the first 3 places. In Thailand in 1955, an elderly woman searched a shallow canal for place using 2 woven basket traps. She pressed the baskets into the mud, trapping fish underneath before reaching inside by hand. In 1900, Honolulu officials burned infected buildings to stop the bubonic plague, but shifting winds turned the operation into a disaster. The fire raged for 17 days, destroyed 38 acres of Chinatown, and left more than 4,000 people homeless. In 1957, Eleanor Roosevelt received this New York pistol permit at the age of 72. 1 year later, despite Ku Klux Klan death threats, she traveled to a civil rights workshop with a loaded pistol beside her. In 1909, John Wilson Webb of Pittsburgh weighed 120 pounds at only 3 years and 2 months old. This rare photograph shows the giant child beside his mother and holding a tiny basket. Modisi, a Hopi girl photographed in 1879, wears the traditional squash blossom hairstyle used by unmarried Hopi women. Its striking shape resembles Princess Leia's famous buns, but George Lucas said Mexican revolutionaries inspired Leia's look. These female partisans helped liberate Crimea in 1944 after operating behind Axis lines. They gathered intelligence, sabotaged transport routes, and guided advancing Soviet troops through terrain the enemy struggled to control. Soviet soldiers move across the shattered steel frame of a factory during the Battle of Stalingrad in 1942. Industrial ruins became deadly strongholds where troops fought through workshops, stairwells, and collapsed buildings at point-blank range. In 1916, museum workers in New York assembled the enormous front leg of a diplodocus. This giant plant eater lived around 156 million years ago, and its towering limb shows just how massive these Jurassic dinosaurs became. Police stormed barricades in Paris's Latin Quarter during the May 1968 uprising. What began as a student revolt triggered nationwide strikes involving millions of workers and pushed France into its deepest political crisis in decades. In 1917, these London women cleaned windows while millions of men were away fighting in the First World War. With no safety ropes or helmets, they climbed narrow ladders carrying heavy buckets, taking on one of the city's most dangerous jobs. Robert Capa photographed Warsaw in October 1948, 3 years after the Second World War ended. About 85% of the city lay destroyed, while a surviving church tower rose above vast fields of rubble. A window cleaner hangs above Madison Avenue in 1957, secured by a narrow safety belt while traffic moves far below. Before modern safety rules and equipment, workers often cleaned skyscraper windows with little protection from a deadly fall. At 3:30 in the morning, exhausted workers from Quandabele collapsed on the floor of an overcrowded bus to Marabastad. David Goldblatt took this photograph in 1983, exposing how apartheid forced black workers into brutal daily journeys just to reach their jobs. In China, prisoners were locked into a heavy wooden cangue that made eating, sleeping, and moving extremely difficult. Their crime and sentence were often written on the board, turning public humiliation into part of the punishment. In 1932, William Beebe and Otis Barton entered this tiny steel sphere and descended about 2,200 feet below the Atlantic Ocean. The bathysphere had no engine and hung from a single cable, leaving its crew trapped if the line failed. On October 27, 1945, President Harry Truman addressed 50,000 people at Sheep Meadow in Central Park. With World War II finally over, he publicly thanked the men and women of the United States Navy for helping secure victory. Jewish partisan Rachel Rudnitsky stands among armed fighters after the liberation of Vilnius in July 1944. She had fought the Nazis in the Rudniki Forest, and her smile captures a rare moment of victory for a survivor of the Holocaust. In 1920, women in New York lined up to vote in the first presidential election after the 19th Amendment. New York women had already won state voting rights 3 years earlier, but the amendment expanded that victory nationwide. In March 1911, 15 children under 12 were found among 60 shrimp pickers at the Peerless Oyster Company in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. The bosses refused to let them be photographed, so this picture was secretly taken while the bosses were at dinner. In 1950, Conrad O'Brien French calmly tipped his hat to a bear in Banff National Park. The former Mountie had survived the First World War and later served as a British intelligence agent during the Second World War, so danger was nothing new to him. In 1961, neurologist Oliver Sacks set a California weightlifting record by completing a full squat with 600 pounds. He later became famous for writing "The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat." In China, in the 1920s, 2 women rode on wooden frames carried by porters, with handles used for balance and direction. The woman on the left was Canadian missionary Ethel Vinden, who worked with the China Inland Mission. During the 1928 Tour de France, Italian cyclist Giusto Cerruti was photographed carrying his broken bicycle after a crash. Race rules denied riders outside help, so Cerruti had to walk alone until he could repair it himself. A wounded German prisoner receives a drink from an American medic in Altavilla, Italy on September 20, 1943. Captured during the brutal Italian campaign, he was treated at a United States medical center despite fighting for the enemy. Near El Pozo in 1898, 2 Cuban Liberation Army scouts aim a Remington and a Mauser from behind a shattered tree. Photographed just 1.5 miles away, they were fighting to end centuries of Spanish rule over Cuba. These young German prisoners were captured near the Sauer River during the Battle of the Bulge in January 1945. Their exhausted faces reveal how Nazi Germany was sending increasingly young and poorly prepared recruits into a war it was rapidly losing. During the First Balkan War, Bulgarian soldiers near Edirne built giant snow bears while waiting between battles. The strange scene was photographed during the brutal winter campaign of 1912 to 1913. Kramatorsk workers tear down a German Krupp factory sign after the city was liberated in 1943. The occupiers had seized the machinery plant and placed it under German control, turning this photograph into direct evidence of their retreat. German occupation forces burn a Soviet village during the Second World War as residents watch their homes disappear beneath enormous clouds of smoke. Thousands of villages were destroyed during the invasion, and many were burned with civilians still trapped inside. A street in Monrovia lies buried under thousands of spent rifle cartridges after Liberia's brutal civil war. Photographed in 2004, the shells reveal the staggering amount of gunfire unleashed in the capital. In 1925, John Logie Baird produced one of the first recognizable television images using the head of a ventriloquist dummy named Stooky Bill. Its bright painted face was chosen because early television could barely detect a real human face. In 1942, Gestapo officer Felix Landau kept Polish-Jewish artist Bruno Schulz alive and forced him to paint murals for his children. Another officer later shot Schulz in the street, reportedly telling Landau, "I killed your Jew." Around 1880, 8 unidentified women turned their backs to the camera to display hair reaching far below their waists. The photograph preserved a rare view of extreme hair length during the Victorian era, when long hair was widely linked to beauty and femininity. In 1984, Afghan resistance commander Ahmad Shah Massoud posed with an AK rifle fitted with an underbarrel grenade launcher. Known as the Lion of Panjshir, he repeatedly stopped major Soviet attacks in the valley. This rare photograph shows a wedding procession moving through Jerusalem around 1904 when the city was under Ottoman rule. Men in turbans crowd the narrow path beneath ceremonial banners and an Ottoman flag, turning a private celebration into a striking public spectacle. This Red Cross nurse stands beside Felix of Lawano, a decorated war dog credited with rescuing 54 Allied soldiers during the First World War. The pair appeared at a Red Cross parade on October 4, 1920. Between 1910 and 1919, the Northwood brothers photographed this elderly Maori woman, the wife of Pakinga Nopara, beside a huge pile of kumara. She holds a tobacco pipe, while a flax basket and her dog rest beside her. Electroconvulsive therapy became widely used after its invention in the 1930s, mainly for severe depression and other serious mental illnesses. This unsettling 1955 photo shows a patient receiving an electrical current through his head while 3 hospital workers hold him in place. This enormous whale was photographed in Labrador, Canada in 1930 as a worker cut through its skin to remove the thick layer of blubber. Before petroleum became widely available, whale blubber was boiled into oil for lamps, soap, machinery, and other everyday products. Write in the comments what photos you liked and why.